Shut up and sit down.
Queenstown is a mining cum tourist town in a similar fashion to Cooperpedy in South Australia. The town initially grew in the early 1900s during the mining boom, and that enabled infrastructure such as the West Coast Wilderness Railway to be built. In the present day, the town has become a de facto service capital for the rugged wilderness that is the west coast of Tasmania, as a copper mine has now been closed for nearly a decade, following an incident that resulted in a massive landslide and the death of 3 workers. Queenstown gets its name from Queen River that runs through its centre. The Queen River merges with the now dammed King River, which was formed the Lake Burbury that now powers the John Butler hydroelectric power station. The 2 rivers meet at the confluence, where the silt-laden Queen River now dominates, and the murky water then flows westwards towards Macquarie Harbour. Queenstown is also a prized example of poverty reinforcing poverty. When the town originally grew, there was demand for small cheap housing from the mostly single men who worked in the mine. They lacked the financial ability to build anything substantial or to fund for an apartment block. Nowadays, without the mining operating, many of these now derelict single-bedroom homes have become unsellable, as mostly country people need a decent-sized block to run a few head of sheep or to build a side business in a shed. These would-be holiday homes were cheaply built, and now they're nothing but a fire hazard. Looking around town, there are many examples of poor planning foresight, and I don't seem to have any ability to rectify these mistakes. For example, it's just cheaper to build a new school down the road than it is to knock down the old one and rebuild in the original site. Additionally, many of these smaller blocks need to be forcibly amalgamated with the neighbouring blocks, just to create a property big enough for someone to have an interest in purchasing. Many of the locals have a long proud connection with the town, as I don't see any new arrivals coming here to make a life for themselves. At the end of Queenstown's railway line is a nearby fishing village of Strawn. It's probably the largest tourist spot on the west coast, and from here you can visit the historic Macquarie Harbour that once had a penal station similar to Port Arthur. There's also access to Tassie's secluded west coast via Ocean Beach. In Queenstown, there are ample bushwalks, museums and shops, but little other touristy things to do. If you enjoy being in the middle of nowhere, with a whole heap of other people surrounded by miles of unsettled wilderness, then Strawn is a better place for you. And personally, I don't understand why the locals aren't making more out of the railway, as tying the 2 towns together with a functional public transport. I remember riding the Byron Bay train, where they managed to give a new useful life to a legacy piece of infrastructure. In the high 20s, the day started out quite warm for Tassie, and so far I've managed to avoid National Route 1 by travelling up and down each coast. But now I was travelling through the centre of the island. Also on this hop, I wanted to revisit the sections of the A10 that I missed when getting towed to Hobart. I started heading back down to Kempton, which was only some 50 kilometres from where I was a little over a week ago. Compared to other roads around the state, I was expecting that National Route 1 will be a fast-moving multi-lane highway. But I'm guessing that the colder months around here prevent major road upgrades, and it felt like half the road between Launceston and Kempton were under construction, and I was one of the many caught behind the numerous Karens. Tasmanians are predominantly a rural people who typically pride themselves on creating great food and alcohol, and at the Huntington Tavern in the small town of Tempton was no exception. For the first time in my life, I ordered a 400-gram steak, and I actually got a 400-gram steak. I should be very thankful that the farmers around here all know their cuts of meat. Heading off after lunch on the first dirt road of the day, the sun was out and the sheep were all wandering all over the road. With the warmer weather giving the golden tinge to the grass, the place really started to remind me of the New South Wales countryside. And riding down what was classified on the maps as a main road turned out to be a single-lane track that allowed me to snake my way back to the A10 at Granta. Barely managing 50 kilometres an hour, it was slow going, but interesting to see these tucked away rural properties. The A10 is probably the best tourist road in Tasmania, and having ridden the sections I missed, I decided to take a back road long cut rather than re-riding the sections I had previously. I turned off the A10 at Elst and made my way past the D Lagoon, which was another great find. Also, for the first time in Tassie, I actually found some decent dirt roads which I was able to ride the 80-kilometre speed limit on. And that just points out the quality of my luck, as I'm pretty sure this is going to be the last dirt road I'm going to ride on this trip. Getting back to the A10 at the Bronte Lagoon, I was now heading into the Franklin Gordon Wild Rivers National Park. This national park is infamous for the Franklin River, which the Hawke federal government stopped the Tassie government from building a dam on. The road here is a bit memorising with all the twists and turns. Normally it would be a motorcyclist dream road, but with the rough surface it was making life quite difficult. And you can see here, right in the middle of an apex, there was a massive dip. Being in a corner, it was too late to swerve or try jumping over. I just bottomed out and did my best to stay on two wheels. The divots in the road made riding complicated. I couldn't see what the surface was like around the corners and just had to slow down and then expect the worst. Maybe for once having the extra suspension travel of an adventure bike really would have made sense when riding on the bitumen. I'll let the downhill section coming into Queenstown speak for itself. Without a private Airbnb host, I'm having to stick it out in a 1980s motel. They provided me with $4 bottled water, $5 cans of beer and $25 bottles of wine. Even with that, I shouldn't damn the place that much, as the last time I stayed in a hotel, the fridge didn't work and I had to buy my own cutlery. It's a lot different from the usual Airbnb, hosted in a private home where I don't have to deal with the children of other guests or other tenants checking in late at night thinking they've booked the same room as me. So I'm happy that I'm only here for a few days while I wait for the boat ride back to the mainland. The roads around here are as lumpy as any dirt road, and even with a sports bike, I'm pushing my limits just trying to stick to the 100km speed limit. After getting new tyres at Hobart, I've pretty well worn away the chicken strips without even trying. With all the dirt roads over the last couple of weeks, I'm thinking I need to clean and lube the chain once I get back to Melbourne. The bike's about due for a major service, but hopefully it can hold off until I get back to Sydney. I'm again roaming on the Telstra network and I don't have data. The motel room is looking out in the wrong direction to set up the Starlink dish without putting it in the way of other guests. The hotel has Wi-Fi, but being in the 5 GHz range, it keeps dropping in and out. I'm happy that I decided to use these extra few days waiting for the return trip to come and visit Queenstown. After 4 weeks living in Tassie, it started to get to me just how similar the entire state is, and Queensland is very different from the agrarian nature of the rest of the state. And after visiting so many other country towns around Australia, the mining towns are becoming my favourite, as they have their own personalities, which give them something interesting to differentiate themselves. Queenstown was once a dominant mining operation on the west coast, and nowadays there are just a number of smaller operations spread out around the place, all work with larger machinery and less workers. The town has now become a regional service centre for both government and tourist operators. It does draw many parallels with other tourist towns like Noosa, Arley Beach and Byron Bay, but here there is more heavily focused on the eco-tourists. I'm somewhat surprised I didn't find a similar commercial centre as those other tourist towns, with a main street full of hiking and eco-brands like Kathmandu and the like. Next up is Melbourne and hopefully some better weather. I'm struggling below the 35th parallel and I can't wait to make my way back north as my body seems to be firmly adapted to the subtropics. It's going to be a long trip with lunch in Burnie and an early dinner before disembarking the island on a red-eyed trip back to the mainland. Hopefully I'll be rested enough for the short ride to St Kilda in the morning. There I hope to have a warm 2-week stay and will catch up with my cousins. So thanks for following my adventures around Australia and remember to go out there and do something to enjoy your day.